Now please join me in welcoming Bonnie Jo and Donna to the CPL stage.
Is this working? Yes. Hi, thanks for being here. Bonnie Jo, it's so good to be talking with you.
Oh, it's great to be here.
A little congratulations on the Today Show. The Waters was a pick for that, and that's pretty impressive. I was impressed they chose such a beautiful literary novel. And I wanted to talk to Bonnie about the language, so I thought maybe a little reading would get us in the mood and sort of set the stage.
Yeah, so I'm just going to read the first page, which is the one long paragraph. Okay. I mean, it's fun to hold this, so let's see if I'm sophisticated enough.
Maybe I can, you want me to hold yours?
No, I got to practice my dexterity holding this.
It is a little tricky.
Oh, look at that, I signed this book to you?
Yes, this is my copy, and I want it back.
It is funny. I think they're prettier before it has the decal on it.
Yeah,
so
well, but be prepped.
Okay, this begins with chapter 0, which is sort of the little mathematical conceit
Exactly.
that the book has. As you know, if you've read the book, it has some mathematics in it. Chapter 0, the prologue. The town has a troubled soul. Once upon a time, Masaga Island was the place where desperate mothers abandoned baby girls and where young women went seeking to prevent babies altogether. But in living memory, Rose Cottage on the island was the home of the herbalist, Hermine herself, Zook, who raised her 3 daughters there. The oldest, a lawyer named Primrose, was the most accomplished. The middle daughter, Mary Rose, called Molly, a nurse, was the most practical. And the youngest, Rose Thorne, was lazy and beautiful. Hermine's medicines, her tinctures, salves, and waters, are now discredited in the light of day. But at night, the people of White Heart, Michigan, still use them if some tidy housekeeper or other busybody hasn't tossed away the unlabeled jars and bottles. Only tiny amounts of these fixes are required, as they have become more effective with time. Sometimes just unstoppering a bottle is enough to release a cloud of soothing into an ailing household. The island and its women loom large in the dreams of local folks, who sometimes wake up sweating from visions of witches in black, though the island women never wore black, or of crows watchful in treetops, or of swamp streams bubbling up through the floorboards of their houses. It is said that the island, where healing waters percolate to the surface, was a place where women shared one another's dreams, a place where women did what they wanted.
Thank you. So that's a really wonderful distillation of much that goes on in the novel. And I want to ask you about the incredible lushness of your writing. You describe so many plants and creatures and aspects of the landscape, not just like beautifully, it is beautiful, but there's a lot of facts in there. And I want to know how you attained that saturation.
Yeah, I mean, I think the language in this book is different from my other books. I think part of it is that the actual quality of the writing is probably because I started writing poetry, and that was something that I swore I'd never do. I used to have it right on my website, like, I'll never write poetry. I write everything except poetry. But then I realized what poetry does. Poetry is how you work with images, it's how you can work with emotions differently in poetry, and it's the way, all my life I've tried to tell stories in writing, and poetry is where you don't have to have a beginning and a middle and an end. You can just have a lush package of stuff in poetry. And so what a luxury, what a pleasure to write. I write poetry now every day when I first wake up. And but in order to write a book that has so much of the natural world in it, I had to, well, I love nature. I'm in nature a lot. I spend a lot of time outdoors. So I have a kind of background in the natural world. And I would make the case, I've been thinking about this a lot, that, and maybe you can disagree with me, let's see. I've been thinking that the American literary imagination is really about the natural world. I think that's not true of European fiction, but I think Americans, we love a lot of city books. I mean, we do have a lot of city books that we love, but I think that, and maybe Chicago's the wrong place to be saying this, because there's such a great tradition of literature in Chicago, but so many of the great American books sort of hearken and yearn for, the nature and the wild world. And I mean, our love for Westerns, our love for these vast open spaces. And so I think it is a tradition in American literature that writers, and I tell my students this, you have to know the natural world. You can't say, there's a blue bird there. You have to know what that bird is. You have to know if we're talking about a blue jay or a bluebird, or an indigo bunting. And so I am constantly trying to increase my knowledge of the natural world. And to write this book, to put it in the swamp, that the place we are right now was a swamp. Yeah. And so was all of Michigan a swamp. The whole lower part of Michigan was a swamp. And so in a way, like it was my, back somehow to the original land that we're on to put the story in the swamp. The swamp is the most fertile, mysterious, and changeable and changing place of all. And it makes a special challenge to write about because the swamp in May is very different from the swamp in June, which is very different than the swamp in September. And so I had to do a lot of research at all times to figure out what is growing now, what is growing at each time. And every time I made changes to the book, I worked on this book for a long time, so it went through a lot of edits and a lot of time changes. And so every time I changed the time, I had to go and change all this stuff. When are the birds there? When there's a lot of crows in the book, but the crows are only on their nests at certain times. So I can't put a crow on a nest at the wrong time. So I had to really be careful and do a lot of research and figure out, where is stuff here then. And then because I'm so interested for this book in the healing herbs of the swamp, I had to do a lot of research in figuring out what used to be there, what is still there, what is becoming extinct there. And so calling on everything I know and then also relying on doing research.
It's incredible it comes together, that sense of really precise facts and a tremendous imagination. Listening to you describe it, I keep thinking of the word
And it does have a Greek chorus.
Yes, the Brutes of Nowhere. It's fabulous. So, I guess part of my sort of next question before we get on to all that is part of the change you track, which I found very affecting, is what's happened to landscapes now. That this, we have multi-generations of these women living on the island, and they talk about what's lost and how some plants aren't as strong as they used to be. And, there's a paper mill nearby. So I want to talk about a little bit of how you bring a little environmental awareness into the story without in any way, it's part of the story, it's really organic to the story, but how important was that to you?
Yeah, this book does bring in pretty much all the issues. It brings in issues of women's reproductive rights and gun rights issues and environmental issues. But I'm hoping that I'm really bringing them in as neighborhood issues.
Definitely.
These are issues that are affecting people in their neighborhood. So they're not abstract things that people are, there's no mention of what's going on in Washington.
No, not a politician to be seen.
Yeah, there's no politician. So I was very interested in, the kind of the history of this land. And there's one place in the book where, we didn't do one today, but what's it called? The land acknowledgement?
Yes, the land acknowledgement.
Yeah, the land acknowledgement. And I put one of those in the book.
You did.
That I couched it in
talking about the first people
that the Potawatomi were
right.
in this region before, and then the changes since then. Of course, I always think when we do that, when Potawatomi were there, but then I've done enough research to find out, well, we could say that this was Potawatomi land, but then 100 years before that, it was a different land, and it changed there was so much change then. But in the purview of the book, the land it was swamps that were filled in, and they were turned into farmland. And that's the first change. And when you do that, you wipe out a lot of wildlife, of course. And then because the farmers use pesticides, then that poisons the swamp. And so I did have to do a lot of research figuring out what were the effects of that. It encourages, non-native plants to grow, or what do we call them, invasives to increase, and that cuts into the population of the native plants. So just puzzling out how this, and it's going on. People are still filling in wetlands. They're still filling in swamps, even in Michigan and everywhere. There's so much pressure on it, and they're still knocking down forests. I gotta say, even people who have beautiful stands of trees in their yard, I watch my neighbors just one by one cutting down all their trees, and it's so painful. And it does change the strength. I think a lot of us are reading these books about trees now. There's a lot of really good books about trees.
Yeah, about the mother trees and the communication underground.
So it's a big deal when you take out a tree.
The whole community.
Important to the whole tree community, and not just the trees, So it's such a complicated thing, and so that is happening in this community. That is happening in this community, and because the matriarch of the family is looking for these healing herbs, she is having a more difficult time finding them. As well as finding. She also uses animals in her healing, and those are harder to come by. But there's so much change to the land, and there are always people who really do try to resist this, try to preserve things, and at all times there have been people trying to preserve things, but they're always fighting against much more powerful forces.
Yeah, so thank you for that. To move on to the people, starting with herself as a healer, you, in your opening paragraph, you name all the daughters, and so herself is a huge force. She's the healer. She has the 3 daughters, and she has a granddaughter who we'll talk about. But the lazy and beautiful one, Rose Thorne, I found in rereading the book, first herself is really dominant, but I felt that this Rose Thorne had a really more mysterious power, and that she learned to use it under great duress. And I wonder if you could talk about, she just seems like the most unexpected character to me, Rose Thorne.
Yeah, I really loved drawing her as a character. I love to write. I love to write about women, but I find it much easier to write about men. And so in my short stories, I write more about men. And women take a whole novel to write about. I need all this unfolding and unpacking. Not to say men are simple. I wouldn't say that, would I?
These guys are plenty complicated.
They're complicated,
Yeah,
okay.
yes.
But I really enjoyed writing about, having this matriarch, because I've always been interested in these farm women. These farm women, they're not sentimental. I mean, they're tough. They're tough. They've had tough lives. And it's a luxury to be soft and sentimental. And these are the women who, I know we don't like to talk about such things, but in the old days, they had to drown the kittens because they would overrun the farm. I mean, these were tough women. And I think it was not easy to grow up with mothers like this. I mean, I had kind of a tough mother a little bit, but not quite like Hermine. And, it's a tough thing. And so one way that you could see the book is that this is the story about an old witch who lives on an island, and she has 3 daughters, and that's
It's
sort
the
of
fairy tale.
the fairy tale. But what I was kind of riffing off of was the old fairy tales where there was a king who has 3 sons, and in the fairy tale, it's always the 2 older sons who are supposed to inherit everything. They follow the rules, and they go off and they can't solve the problem. It's always the foolish, lazy 3rd son who solves the problem. And
He's got nothing to lose. He's not going to inherit anything. Nobody cares about him.
Right. So he's the one who's willing to talk to the animals, and these fairy tales. And so that actually was, what I was riffing off of the matriarchal version of that. And so Rose Thorne is lazy, and she's foolish and lazy and beautiful. And so she must save them all. That's her job. So she doesn't follow the rules. I loved writing this character. And those of you who know me, you know who this character is based on. This is a woman in my hometown, and I thanked her in the back of the book, and she has passed away. And but she was always a person who everybody kind of looked down on, because all she wanted to do was drink beer, and smoke cigarettes. And her name was Janie, and and in the book, this woman, all she wants to do is drink beer and read books.
Yes, she is a reader.
Yeah,
she
doesn't
loves
want to do
Oz
anything
books.
else,
Right.
And who can blame her? I mean, really, isn't that what we want to do? But the community needs her, because her special healing, Hermine is a healer. She makes herbs, she makes medicines. But Rose Thorne heals people basically by having big parties.
She's fun.
She's fun, and people like to be around her. And there's a central romance in the book between Titus and Rose Thorne, and people become invested in this romance. And she has an ability. The town is very divided, and this is another way in which I'm kind of addressing the divide in America in this story. There's a community that's very Christian and is becoming more and more interested in people following these rules, and they're less tolerant. The people in the community are less tolerant of anyone who's different. And these women on the island are very different. They live by different rules. They don't go to church, and there's kind of a divide. I mean, some people like these women, and use their medicines, and everybody uses their
Everybody
medicine.
needs them, yes.
So everybody wants their medicines, but a lot of people use their medicines and disapprove of them, And so I think that's an interesting dynamic where people are interested and they need certain people, but they still look down on them and they still disparage of them. So Rose Thorn does not hold a job. That's her main crime. She doesn't work. She doesn't want to have a job, and she can't stand it. She just can't stand to go to work. And I mean, who can blame her, honestly? Don't you guys hate going to work? I mean, honestly. So she's, that's how come you're a hard worker. So that's probably why you're.
So that's why I love her. Someday.
So I love this character who could break the rules, but she's so necessary because she's the only one who can bring the people from the community together with these women of the island who play this important role in the community, but are kind of, I guess we could say, scapegoats. But at the same time, people look down on Rose Thorn. At the same time, they love her. So it's just an interesting, complicated dynamic. I mean, that's why I love her. I love writing short stories because you can investigate a situation. But in a novel, the luxury is that to really explore these nuances of character and how complicated relationships are. The way that people can love somebody and still not treat them very well at all.
Yeah, yes. Oh, there's so much goes on in this novel. It's incredible. Before we get into that, and no spoilers, let's talk about Rose Thorn's daughter. She names her Dorothy because she loves the Oz books so much. But the girl ends up being called Donkey because donkeys save her life. I think this young lady has some shared attributes with her creator, meaning you. Can you talk about Donkey?
Yeah, the third generation is Dorothy, or Donkey as they call her, and she is 11 years old, and she is a sort of a math whiz. And I studied math, but I'm actually, I wish that I could say I was a math whiz,
To me, you are.
Well, you know what? I hang out with people who can't do math at all. And that's how you end up seeming like a math whiz, because, if you hang out with people who are afraid of math, they think you're really smart, if you can do math at all. So that's my superpower, is that I can do math at all. And so, but she's really fun because, those of you in this, there may be people in this very room who grew up in a chaotic family. And many readers did grow up in a chaotic family. And she seeks the comfort of rational mathematics. She doesn't really quite trust books of fiction. She doesn't quite trust them.
Tell them what the notebook is called that she keeps.
Oh, the book of true things.
I love that.
She has finally, because she's seeking actual true things, and her grandmother seems nutty to her, is always out looking for herbs and wandering around and carrying weird things home in her pockets. And, her mother just runs off to California every once in a while. And, she's seeking what really is true. And so she's obviously wants to study logic and mathematics. But the other thing that fascinates her is men. And so the women of the island are very cautious about men, with good reason. There's been a lot of trouble. Men are not allowed on the island. So that's sort of that's why the island is where women do what they want, because there's no men there. But Donkey, of course, if you deny an 11-year-old girl something, what is she going to want? She wants men. She wants to be around them. She loves them. She loves everything they say. She likes to watch them. Even when they have guns, when they're shooting, she likes the men. And so it makes, this is what you do when you're writing a book. You have to make trouble. You have to just plant all the seeds of trouble that you can find,
Well, let's talk about the rattlesnake. Here's this amazing rattler that Donkey encounters, and I'm thinking, oh, well, here we are. Here's the snake in the Garden of Women, and she's a very powerful entity. Herself explains that it's a she, because Donkey says he. And this is a species I was not familiar with. I wonder if you could talk about the snake and
Yeah, I forgot to look up if there are any in Illinois, any Massasauga rattlesnakes left. There are a few in Wisconsin, but Michigan is the only state where they're not extinct or endangered. So I think they're endangered in Wisconsin. But this is I always say this is kind of a Midwestern rattlesnake. It's sort of a short, fat rattlesnake. It's sort of a, modest, shy rattlesnake. It's not, you won't see it very often. In fact, I know many people who have looked for, actually I should say I looked for it for years and couldn't find. I actually went out with, while I was writing the book, I went out with 2 different teams of biologists looking for them in areas where we knew they were. They found sheds, and we still couldn't find them. So both these times. And the one thing that was very auspicious was right after I finished the book, I was hanging out. Some of you know who Harula Rose is. She made the film.
Yeah.
Of Once Upon a River. And she and I were scheming to make a book trailer, and she and I were at her parents' place in Sawyer, Michigan, and we actually saw a baby Massasauga rattlesnake. And it's funny because she never her family has like 80 acres, and she's like, "Oh, we've never been out here." We've never been out here, and they had this big swampy area, so we actually saw one. I was like, "Don't step out."
That's amazing.
Because the rule is with rattlesnakes, the babies have just as much venom as the adults. So they're born with all the, that's got to be a metaphor, right?
I was going to say, that sounds,
They're born with all the venom, but it was really fun to have, I've always been fascinated with this snake because when I was a kid in elementary school, one showed up on our playground. And I remember our custodian, Mr. Mike, had to come out with a garbage can, and it was very exciting. And it was fun as a kid. Anytime when you're a kid and all the adults are upset, that's a good time.
It's a good day.
Yeah, so I remember they somehow had it on the blacktop, and it was like very exciting time. So I've always been sort of obsessed with the Massasauga rattlesnake. I write in a little river shack, a little shack on the river, on the Kalamazoo River, and I actually have in a dish an actual Massasauga rattlesnake skin. It's like 50 years old or something. It's all like crumbling and everything, but I've got it right there with me. But it was fun to make one into a character. And the Hermine actually makes anti-venom. And so I had to do a lot of research to figure out how one makes anti-venom. And actually you make it by getting the venom. So you have to milk the rattlesnake, which you can see lots of videos on. You can see lots of videos on YouTube on how to do this, but don't do it at home. But then they shoot it into a horse. And they then shoot it into a horse, and then they extract the blood. They leave it in there for a while and extract the blood from the horse. And so I, of course, did it with donkeys. Right. So I had her doing this. So I think actually a person could make, a healer. Probably it wouldn't be as excellent as what they make in a lab, but we make what medicine we can.
That medicine is such a huge theme in this novel, too. Herself contrasts, the natural remedies with the devil doctors in the hospitals, and there's a lot of back and forth about that, which I found was a really interesting theme. There's a great line. This is one of your chapter titles, which I kept thinking about. Times change faster than the people in them. Maybe you could talk about that a little bit, and that.
Yeah, that's a chapter where I go on to talk about how the land has changed and how we've changed from the farming to the people in this area. I base this on kind of my area that I grew up in Michigan. So people were farmers. They were, in fact, a lot of more celery farmers, and the history of celery is kind of once you're writing a book,
who knew?
I know, once you're writing a book, you could just not write the book because you could just do the research. It turns out celery was wildly popular in Chicago. And so everyone in Kalamazoo, Michigan grew celery and then packed it on the train and sent it to Chicago. So because For some reason,
And these were
Chicago-
family farms, right? I mean, which makes a big difference.
Yeah, these were just family farms, and so people were farmers. They farmed the celery and they farmed everything, and then they turned into wheat and corn farmers, which is a different thing because celery, you're talking about a 40-acre farm maybe. When you're growing wheat and corn, you're talking about a 1,000-acre farm. You need a big farm for that. And then once you're not farming, you sell your land to somebody else and you go to work in the paper mill. That was where people worked. And so here, think about the mindset of, in particular, I'm looking at the masculine mindset of a farmer. I mean, a farmer knows exactly who he is. A farmer is very confident in himself and who he is, but then
and the traditions, you make a point where these farmers did what their fathers did and what their grandfathers did,
and then they sell their land and they work in a paper mill, and it's not the same. I mean, sure, you have more money probably, but you don't feel the same. And so I guess I was trying to explore that in trying to, like everybody else, I'm trying to figure out what's going on in America today and why we have this big divide and why we have so many frustrated men. I mean, I think it's fair to say we have a lot of angry, frustrated men.
With guns, yes.
With guns, yeah, like in my book, yeah.
Like in your book.
And so I guess I'm looking at this with wondering if that maybe is some of, that still the mindset of people who now have lost their paper company jobs because the paper companies have closed and now are moving on to something else. Maybe psychologically it was too quickly to move from the farm through all this and then to get where are we now? So
that's really interesting. So this makes me wonder how much of the story had you figured out, at what stage did you sort of know, because it's so intricate. There's all these secrets about relationships and the consequences of violence and, back and forth and neighbors and cousins. And how much of that did you work out? It's just,
I know. I'm one of those writers who doesn't know much when I start. I mean, my first thing the first thing I knew in the book was Dorothy Donkey. I was interested initially. Here's the book I wanted to write. I wanted to write a playful romp about a young female mathematician. That was my idea. That's what I sat down with, and it's like very quickly it became clear that was not what I was writing. So right away I started tracing what is the situation? What is the situation that makes this more interesting? And I think it's because my mom always just wanted me to write a playful romp. That was what she wanted me to write. So I always try, and then and everything I've written has turned into a kind of a complicated psychological study of, and what I always end up, I'm a very slow writer, and the more I write, the more complicated and intricate everything gets, which then makes my job way harder, because how do you finish a book like this? The ending is very complicated, I will say.
Yes.
A lot happens, and this book is also, nobody really notices, but this book is really a love story to a lot of other books.
Oh yes, that goes on in there for sure.
So the ending, there's an ode to anybody who's a fan of True Grit. The ending is kind of an ode to true grit, And if you haven't, the movies are great, but the book is just the best, And the ending goes on and on. That's one thing for sure about the ending.
Very dramatic, very dramatic, and and the tragic love story, the just never getting it right. The many dimensions, and and people sort of this island starts seeming enormous. There's so many different places on it, and so many different things happen, and there's so many different animals. Did you find that the place itself kept sort of morphing on you while you were writing?
I know, it is funny, but isn't that how life is? It's like I'm 61 right now, and everything is so rich and complex. I didn't realize this when I was 20. The complicated web that we live in, if you keep what I notice as a writer, what I do is I just keep looking, I just keep looking. And because I don't plot things out in advance. I should. It would probably be easier to write. But I hope I'm moving somewhere. But like the more you keep, what I look for as I'm writing a book, I don't know if some of you are writers, but I just keep studying what is actually there, what is actually happening. And what really actually happens when I do that anyway, is that things become more mythic. Like, even though I'm looking at the actual thing, like this story, if it has a time, it's the year 2000, something like that. So, and I could say more about that, why you actually do have to have your book take place in a certain time. You can't just have it magically in a nowhere time, because you'll screw up the moons, the full moons. You'll screw things up that and days of the week you have to work out. But the more you do this and you pay super close attention to like what is actually there and how exactly do people feel, like what happens is something rises out of those particulars, and it's the great mystery of fiction, that rising out of those particulars is something mythic. And what happens is you're getting from regular people, you're getting to archetypes. You're getting to these archetypal ancient stories. So what happens if you keep working on a story long enough, you get back to an ancient story somehow.
Yeah, that really happens in this book. And yet, you have this incredible dialogue. I wrote a little note going, dialogue, how does she do it? It's funny, it's mysterious. There's a scene where all the sisters are in the kitchen, the small kitchen at once. The dynamics of that are incredible. So it's true, this is mythic, and there's archetypes, but then you're also like really in the moment, and these are people, you're there. And so I wonder, like, the skills with the descriptions that you write that are so beautiful, and then the dialogue. Where does that dialogue come
I loved writing that kitchen scene, and I based the kitchen on my grandparents' kitchen, the cottage kitchen, and my Uncle Terry is here somewhere. Where's Uncle Terry? Yeah, so that's his kitchen now, and it's a little tiny kitchen, so it's so fun to be able to see that in my head and to people it with my own people. But that I love a dinner scene. I just love a dinner scene. And originally I wrote that dinner scene to be like 120 pages long, because it was so fun to write it. And it's always a challenge to a writer to make change occur in real time, on the page, in front of the very eyes of the reader. That's one of the challenges. Like, it's easy enough to have change, like, and then he went away for 8 years, and then he comes back and he's changed. But to have that change occur, like people's minds changing in real time, and having, I really am a big fan of bickering, maybe not in real life. Well, I'm married to a guy who likes to bicker. Like, it's fun for him, and I had to kind of learn how to do it, because I thought it meant he was mad or something, and it's like, no, we're making funny talk. And so I love to record bickering. And even as a kid, I can remember one of my favorite things was to just listen to a bunch of men talking. Like, the way that men like razz each other and they insult each other, like, even as a kid, I couldn't get enough of that. Like, that is so funny. Or flirting. If you're a kid and you don't know what flirting is, like, it's fascinating to watch. If you're not invested in the flirting, it's much better, because if you're invested in the flirting, like, you're all worried about how it's going, But if it's just like you're watching it, it's so fun. And so, but at this table, they've got kind of this serious business going on. And they're all angry with each other. All these women have their gripes with each other. They're all angry at their mother. They're all kind of annoyed with each other, and they're trying to put this meal on the table. And it was a fun thing to write.
Oh, yeah, it's just great. It's so vital. And for all the seriousness in this novel, it's a lot of humor. There really is. So you sort of, when you're moving between those two extremes, there really is mysteries to fiction. It's just amazing to hear you talk about it, too, because even as a reader, you're sort of reading along, and then all of a sudden you stop and you go, how is this happening? How did this person come up with all this? I'm very
Well, that's
intrigued
because
by
you're
that.
a reviewer, so you
Yeah,
have
well,
to.
I'm an inquisitive reader. But you mentioned Harula Rose and the movie for Once Upon a River. And so, of course, and the book trailer that you guys did for this book was really lovely. It was beautiful. So I'm wondering if there's a movie in thoughts about the water as a film?
Well, we've been talking about it, and like you have all these, I have agent people who think more seriously about it, but apparently it's a little bit too much of a story for a movie. Because what would it would have to pare
You'd have
down
to cut, you'd have to pick one.
You'd have to pick
plot,
one
sort of.
plot, yeah. And so, but it could be a miniseries or like an 8-part miniseries or something. And a lot of people feel like that's where the really interesting stories are being told now.
Yes.
Is on these on these either miniseries or even actually Harula has an idea, it could even be a show that would just keep going on.
Wow. Well, what do you think about that? Would you want to be involved with that?
It would be fun as long as I didn't have to do too much.
Yeah.
If I could just pop in and have great ideas, or they would tell me my ideas were great. Wouldn't that be nice? As opposed to at home where like people think my ideas are nutty. So if there was someplace I could go where people would say, "Oh, that's so smart, Bonnie," and I wouldn't even care if they actually did any of it, but they would just tell me. I could have like a title. Like I'd be an executive producer or something,
right.
whatever that means. I don't know.
Well, that's so interesting. I love reading. I love language. I like to see the words on the page, but I also completely adore movies. But they're frustrating because they often start with a novel, and they just turn into a different work of art if they're a success, or if they're a failure, they just mess up. But so this just seemed like a huge challenge to me, but I couldn't help but wonder because Once Upon a River just worked so beautifully. It's such a lovely film. If you haven't seen it, you should stream it.
Yeah, because it was able to and even that, like as I watched Harula pare it down from 300 pages to 90, it was shocking. It took out a death.
Took out
a lot.
Yes, yeah.
And yet, I think emotionally it landed in the same place. So.
Well, it becomes so visual, and the cast was incredible. The main character, she was just perfect. So you're reading a face instead of words, and you accept the distillation. But here, this would be tough. But I think it would be great. I'd love to see it.
I know, I kind of like the idea of the world going on, this world going on.
Right.
Even if I'm not right, I go write about something else, but this world could continue.
Well, you lived with this book a long time. Are you thinking about another novel or stories? Or?
Yeah, I'm working on a very short novel. This is long. This was like almost 700 pages at one point, so, so I had to cut it down. I know some people can get away with a 700-page novel, but I just thought, I better figure it out. But I'm working on a short, and it's funny because I thought it was just a novella, and then I've heard this rumor that like the short novel is a thing now. So the slender novel is a thing. So maybe what I thought was a novella, I thought it was a 120-page novella. Maybe it's a 150-page slender novel.
Yeah. So. Oh, that's great. That's great. And will we ever see any of your poetry?
So far, it's mostly published in the Southern Review. I don't have the nerve to send it anywhere else, except they're really nice. They always take 2 poems, whatever I send them, so I always send it to them. I do have a manuscript, so
good. I was going to say, I'd love to see a collection. Love to see a collection.
But it's kind of like, I don't know if it's a good poetry, but it's a good fiction writer's poetry, maybe. I think real poets are magical beings, but fiction writers have their own version of poetry, I think.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm always interested. Poetry is very tough. It's mysterious to read. You can't just pick it up. It's sort of demanding, and a lot of people are afraid of poetry. So when I review poetry, I'll often say something like, "Really, anyone can read this. Don't be afraid." And often it's people that write in different genres, I think, that are able to enter poetry and not necessarily tell a story, but just have it flow in a different way.
Well, I think we're actually very comfortable with narrative poetry. As a nation, we're comfortable with, or as a people, I should say. The great traditions of European poetry are narrative, but it's not, maybe now, contemporary poetry is less narrative. So.
Yeah, it really varies, but it's often very personal and, kind of almost memoir-like sometimes.
And that's why poets are writing the best memoirs.
They are, yes. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie. It was so great to talk to you. I'm hoping somebody else has questions, or I can just keep going, but if someone else would like to ask, there's a microphone over here, or you can yell. We'll try to listen. Any questions? Speak about the donkeys.
I know, the donkey, it's fun. The donkeys are triumph and disaster. And those of you, there's your literary quiz today, which is from a Kipling poem. And the funny thing is that we actually had donkeys named Triumph and Disaster when I was young.
That.
And of course, we called the girl Aster because she was lovely. And but the donkeys in this story are kind of companion animals, but they're a breeding pair, and I just love them. I've always wanted to put donkeys into a story, and I've never been able to. I've written donkeys in, but had to write them out. Often I put a lot of things into a story, but it doesn't get to stay. So these donkeys got to stay because they fit in their. Donkeys also live a long time. Donkeys can live to be 50 years old, and that makes them more interesting because donkeys can be in a family for a really long time.
I did not know that.
The donkeys themselves can have a history. And these donkeys are part of Hermine's medicine because Aster is part of making this medicine, this anti-venom. And also in this community, there's a belief that donkey milk is especially healing. And this is actually something that a lot of people believe, that donkey milk has special healing powers. I mean, to a fault, if you look up, there's some kind of disturbing stuff that unpasteurized donkey or unsterilized donkey milk is being used medicinally by certain people for certain medicine, as a medicine in a way that maybe isn't very healthy. But it was interesting to me that donkeys have this history. And also, donkeys are the women of the world. I mean, donkeys carry the burdens of the world. And that is why I have donkeys and I spoil them. Because donkeys around the world carry the burdens of society. And I just love them. They're stoic. They can endure pain that you can't imagine. I mean, donkeys are so stoic. They're not taken care of often. And so I just wanted to celebrate them, I think.
That's great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Uncle Terry. And
Yay, Uncle Terry.
I admire the way Bonnie touched on some of the biggest problems of the whole world in her book, especially and she just got some land in what used to be a swamp. And it used to be a 17-mile long swamp in this river that now floods all the time because it was all turned into farms, right? And sprayed with defoliant and God only knows what. Anyway, but the other big problem, draining swamps, and that swamps are gone as they drain them. And you really touch on the deforestation characters because Elizabeth Colbert in the New Yorker, I think Underwater, she says that actually people clear cut 27 million square miles. And then I read, of course, Finding the Mother Tree, and that hero of a scientist, she even explains the everything, the fungi and the whole works.
Yeah, and I think something people don't realize is a swamp is actually a forest. Yeah. That is actually how a swamp is different from a bog or a fen. Swamps are forested. I mean, they're so critical in so many ways.
And by the cottage, the big old trees are the swamp trees. But when you drain the swamp, these little trees grow back up. So. And then people want to cut them down again. But the other flip side of the deforestation that's going on. Like now we're paying Archer Daniel Midlands to tear down the Amazon and plant soybeans. Well, and we all know what that's going to do to the fungi, and God only knows what, right? So,
Yeah.
but here's in Nutmeg Curse, it gives you the other half of the story, which I didn't know, and that is when all of these colonists went over, they killed 50 million people. The farmers had nobody to feed. They let the jungle grow over their fields. The CO2 level dropped to 200 parts per million. It caused a little ice age for 150 years. And nobody talks about that very much. You can even they saved the cores out of the glaciers that have all melted, and you can find it in the air bubbles. So
Yeah.
that was
I know, you guys should talk to Uncle Terry afterwards, because he knows stuff about this, because it's very
But
interesting.
I will
So-
leave you guys alone. But I do know,
But talk to him afterwards,
I do
because
know
it's
a lot
very
of math
interesting.
too. So and her older brother he's fluent in HPL, which is the old time.
Okay, and Terry, and talk to him about that too. Thank you, Terry.
Thank you. That is a great book, that Amitav Ghosh.
Is
that
it?
Nutmeg,
Yeah.
yeah. And he has a new one, too, that's about the opium trade that has a lot of environmental stuff in there. It's
Oh, yeah.
really fascinating stuff.
Hi, I'm Minji. I haven't read your book yet, but I'm so excited to. Thank you so much for coming. So you mentioned that you purposely write or incorporate a lot of environmental issues and other, like political issues in your book. And I was just wondering if you write about it intentionally with the intention of like inspiring change in people that read it, and whether you think writing about it in like more of an optimistic or versus like a pessimistic way is more effective. Yeah.
I know, you're asking such hard questions, because I mean, the tradition of American fiction is to be absolutely apolitical. It really is. That's the tradition of it. But as as people, we can't be apolitical. I mean, you can't avoid it. So I think it is a big challenge how to do it without turning people off.
Right.
I think it is a big challenge. And so for me, what's absolutely critical is the only time I put politics in, well, you know what? I'm going to say it's not politics. It's actually human relationships. It's actually the politics the things that we see as political problems. These are I'm bringing them out as actual relationship issues in this community, and that's how I'm able to do it. I don't think it seems heavy-handed. That's what you want to avoid, is seeming heavy-handed. What I would say is that if you're going into writing a book with the intention of the political, fiction might not be the best thing to do. It might be better to write a nonfiction book. But if you just can't help it, like I think for me, I just can't help it, that I see in these relationships of this neighbor who, these particular neighbors who they just go around armed all the time. I don't know if you guys have neighbors like this, but I do. And it's like, it just seems dangerous. And so I am creating scenarios where that danger becomes actualized and where things happen. And the same with these, Hermine is not going to is not going to her congressperson and talking about this. She's just noticing, look, in this ditch, this stuff is, the plants are not growing anymore that used to grow here. So that politics arises naturally out of these interactions. So, but it is a hard thing because we care about the world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalia, and I'm about halfway through the book. And one of the things I think I really like about all of your books is just the depth of the characters and the fact that everything seems very intentional and it makes them seem real. And so earlier, when you mentioned that farm women are really tough because they had to drown kittens, it made me think of Molly, or Mary Rose, right? Who lives in a trailer with 19 cats that she doesn't let outside. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you developed her character, who just seems really sort of in opposition to herself in a way, in an interesting way, I think, because she's a nurse and herself is a healer, and they're similar but different. So just wondering if you could talk about that.
Isn't it? I love that like different people like identify with these different sisters and take an interest in them. I mean, the one thing that you all have to admit is that if you are a sister or know sisters, sisters become as different from each other as possible. Like in an environment, even though they're from the same family and they have these similar characteristics, like sisters seem to make it their mission, even when they love each other, to become absolutely as different as they can. And so I envisioned in this family that every woman in this family is a healer of some kind. And so Hermine is this sort of seems irrational. She heals by her intuition and by her knowledge that she has. And so, of course, she has a daughter who's a medical nurse who follows, all the rules of the American Medical Association. Like, she's completely a straight down the line medical nurse. And so I really enjoyed drawing that character because, of course, she's going to be annoyed with her mother. Of course, she's going to be the absolute opposite of what her mother is doing. And I really like drawing her because she's actually a really good nurse. She's a really good nurse, even though she's in opposition to, and I guess I did want to do that because I wasn't trying to write a book that's saying natural healing is better than healing at the hospital. No, they're just, they're different and they're the same. Sometimes they're the same, but they come at it a different way. So I liked having somebody who actually was, a representative of modern medicine. And I wanted to represent her positively and sympathetically, but she just can't, resist these cats. She's very tough in some ways, but she's so soft-hearted, and she keeps trying to rescue these cats. And if you're in a small community where people don't have a tradition of humane societies, like there's always some poor beleaguered woman who is trying to feed all the wildlife, or all the wild cats, and is trying to take care of it. I mean, in a larger community, you have institutions that do this. But I enjoyed that Molly. I think she's a wonderful character. I love her so much, but I also see why she drives everybody else crazy. Everybody else is like, why does she have to have all these 19 cats in her trailer? Because she can't let them out in the trailer park, and one time they get loose and she has to get them all back in. And yeah, I really enjoyed drawing her character, so thank you.
I think we have time for one virtual question, which is, can you talk a little bit about your writing process?
Yeah, writing's hard. How many people are writers out here? I think there's actually a bunch of writers here. Yeah. Writing is like, I think what I really like to do is sit alone in a room. And so writing justifies that. So and what I really want to do is I'm an obsessor and I'm a worrier. Okay, I'm a worrier. Mostly I just worry about people. I worry about people in my community. I worry about my family members. And so I get a worry thing going on in my head, and then it turns into something that I want to investigate on the page, worrying about a situation. And so I just start with a character kind of character I'm worried about. Sometimes it's a real life character. Sometimes it's sort of comes from the news. Sometimes it's made up. And I just work that. I just work with that little nugget that I have and I make it bigger, and then I'm like, what is the bigger situation this character could be in? And then how do I change the character to make her even more interesting? And what kind of family does this character have? And so I just basically write a little bit. I make the story a little better. I hope that I have a good dream that'll tell me something more. Or I'm driving and I think of, oh, that could happen. Oh, that's why she's the way she is. I see she has that history. And so some of my stories are stories I write about characters, and I go back and I like, oh, that's how she, and I wrote the whole novel, Once Upon a River, because I had a character in the present, and I was like, how'd she become that way? Oh, and then I have a whole story. So yeah, I just write really organically. I write very organically, and I write every day that I can. I'm sad when I'm not writing. I'm on the book tour right now, so I'm sort of sad because I'm not writing. I try to sneak little bits of writing in. And the good news about writing is this is what they didn't tell me, because I was late coming to writing because I thought you had to be talented, and I thought you had to be super duper smart, and I thought you had to be gifted. And then what I learned is that no, you just have to keep at it, and you have to work really hard and just keep really working. And that's good, because we live in the Midwest. We know how to work hard. So that was a big relief. So I work really hard at that writing.
Well, great. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight, but thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Donna and Bonnie.
You, Donna.
And I want to remind you that this book and all of Bonnie's books are available at your local Chicago Public Library branch. This event was live streamed and is also available for on-demand viewing. So if you have a friend who couldn't come tonight, tell them to watch it on our